This is the exact formula that I would use if I wanted to start dropping body fat tomorrow. Now, as you know, my goal is to help you get in shape without the extremes. And for me, the extremes are having to do things which aren't necessary to get in shape. For example, cutting out carbs, eliminating your social life, going sober, or having to do fasted cardio 7 days a week. So let's get straight into it. Step number one, you need to set your calories. What we're going to do to find your calories is times your body weight in pounds by 10. Now you can go slightly higher than this, but I find that 10 is the sweet spot for allowing you to drop a decent amount of weight on a week-to-week basis without having to struggle on super low calories. So let's say my body weight is 200 pounds, I'm going to times that by 10, and my starting calorie intake is 2,000 calories per day. Now after we've set our calories, we're then going to build a nutrition or meal framework. Now this is going to be super important for you to understand what you're going to be eating and when on a day-to-day basis. And this is going to look completely different for everybody. Now this is my preference and how I like to set my day up. I like to typically push back my first meal of the day. I like to have 3 set meals per day plus an additional snack. Now for you, you might start your day at 7 a.m. with your first meal and you might finish your day at 6 p.m. For others, they might start their day at midday and finish their meals at 9 p.m. Like I said, this is going to completely depend on you, your preferences, and ultimately your lifestyle. The key part here is that we're having well-distributed meals which are going to be high in protein, high in food volume, and high in veggies to help you sustain this calorie deficit without feeling hungry all the time, but most importantly, staying within your calorie targets. And so a classic example for me would be I would have my water and coffee in the morning, and that will sustain me through until that 11 o'clock marker. At 11 o'clock, I will typically have an egg-based breakfast, whether that's an omelette, scrambled eggs, fried eggs, and typically paired alongside some kind of carb like bread. If I wanted to, I could then bulk that out with some additional veggies, be that onions, peppers, tomatoes, or spinach, again, just to bulk that meal out. Then moving on to a later lunch around about 3 p.m. is typically then when I would have leftovers from the night before. So if I'm cooking something like a chili, like a curry, or a big volume-based meal, something which I can typically batch cook, then I'll have the leftovers and I'll have that for next day's lunch. Then post-workout, I will then have some kind of snack. And by snack, it's typically going to be some form of protein shake or Greek-based yogurt, and then I'll add in a bunch of fruit, again, to help bulk that out and making sure that I'm hitting those protein targets. Then my final meal of the day, again, it's very simply put. I pick a protein, pick a carb, a bunch of salad and veggies, and create a meal off the back of it. It's a very simple and easy approach. I have a selection of different meals that I'll have for breakfast, for snacks, and for my main meals, and then I will rotate them around on a day-to-day basis. I typically have somewhere in the region of about 3 to 5 different meals that I rotate throughout the week so that I don't get bored. So it's simple, reduces down the decision making, and I know it's going to allow me to stay within my targets. Again, I typically like to use an approach when the goal is fat loss of 80% of what I need and 20% of what I want. So even on certain days, if I wanted to substitute and pull out, let's say, the snack, and then I can bring in something that I actually wanted, be that chocolate, maybe some ice cream, or even if I wanted a couple of cold beers. Now, personally for me, I'm always going to weigh out and track my food. I would use something like MyFitnessPal to allow me to do that. And I'm always planning my meals out the day before. I don't walk into a new day thinking and umming and ahhing about what I'm actually going to eat. Like I said, if you're someone who's going to be super busy with work, maybe you're going to be occupied with family or other activities you have throughout the day, the last thing you want to be thinking about is what you're going to be eating on that day. And this is the number one thing that I see people screw up on all the time. So make the effort to put aside 5 to 10 minutes the night before and map out clearly, ideally planning it into a logger like MyFitnessPal as to what you're going to be eating. And like I said, basing it around that framework so you know those main meals you're consuming at approximate times. It doesn't have to be spot on. There may be variations and changes that happen with the day, but having that framework built in place is going to be super important. Weighing out the food allows you to be more accurate. So again, instead of eyeballing or guessing, this will come later on in your journey. Okay, when you're potentially in phase 2 or phase 3, you will then have the experience, the knowledge, and the competency to be able to do that. But in the beginning, you want to try and be accurate as possible and gain a better understanding of overall food portions. So weighing out your food as and when you can, again, is going to be really important. And as I said, adding in this tracking element just means you're going to reduce down that margin of error. It's not always going to be perfect, and even the calorie side of things is never going to be 100% accurate. but it's a hell of a lot more accurate than getting to the end of the day thinking that you've been on plan, but actually a bunch of random nibbles and snacks have made their way in, which you have not accounted for. Even things like butters, oils, or dressings should be implemented into your tracker, like I said, at least one day in advance. So next up, we have the step target. An old school way of looking at it is just simply walking. Now, is it essential that you have a step target in place in order to shift body fat? Technically, no. However, is it going to be beneficial for you to allow you to enhance that deficit and implement something which is not only going to benefit you from a fat loss perspective, but also general health and well-being? Then yes, I'd highly recommend it. Now, do you have to go for the gold standard or the generic 10,000 steps per day? No. However, you'll probably find at the moment you're on the lower end of the spectrum, maybe somewhere between 2,000 to 5,000 steps per day. So for me, during my last fat loss phase, I simply bumped mine up, which was at 5,000 steps per day, to 8,000 steps per day. It's an extra half hour of movement throughout the day, which accumulatively helped nudge me closer towards that 1% rate of loss per week. You don't need to make a dramatic change, but you do need to start bumping up that daily activity to help increase your overall energy expenditure. It's going to be the most least taxing thing that you do, and hence why you can afford to do high volumes without it leading to fatigue and potentially impacting things like your appetite or your training performance. So that's why I typically preference pushing a higher step count relative to doing additional cardio, be that steady state or high intensity. However, you can do a mixture of the two, and we're going to get to that in a moment. But the most important part is to see where you're at right now and to see what you can afford to do in terms of consistently increasing that step count or looking at it as a weekly total. So you may aim for that 10,000 steps per day, which is a total of 70,000 steps per week. However, there might be some days where you only manage to hit 8 or 9, but there'll be other days where you manage to push that up to 11 or 12. But the average across the week is 10,000, which means that you're moving, again, that needle forward in terms of taking your activity up from, let's say, 8 to 10. As you can see, my pen is dying, but we're going to keep moving forward. Last but not least is your workouts. Now, again, same thing applies with steps. Do you need to work out in order to drop body fat? Technically, no, because if you put yourself in a calorie deficit via your nutrition, you can still lose that body fat on a week-to-week basis. However, what we're also trying to do during this fat loss phase is improve our body composition or lay the foundations for phase 2. And that's when it's really important to start resistance training to allow you to either maintain the muscle you've already built or to allow you to potentially even build some new muscle in this first fat loss phase. However, you've got to be able to do that at a more faster and consistent rate when your calories are at maintenance or above. So again, like I said, that will come in phase 2 and beyond. However, what I recommend, as always, is trying to achieve at least 3 workouts per week. Now, whether you're training from home or at the gym, is completely dependent, again, on your lifestyle and what you currently have access to. I always recommend the gym just because I feel like it's a better environment to train from. There's way more equipment, which brings more variety to you, allowing you to work around your needs and push yourself on a more consistent basis. Now, again, in terms of time spent in the gym, on average, a decent workout is normally completed within the range of 45 to 60 minutes. Can you do less than that? Of course you can. However, that's going to reduce down the amount of total volume that you can achieve on a week-to-week basis, which is potentially going to inhibit your ability to build muscle. Now, I know that's not your primary goal right now in this fat loss phase, but like I said, we're laying the foundations for what's to come. And importantly, like I said, by the time you get to the end of your fat loss phase, the bigger picture is to help improve your body composition. And the way in which you're going to do that is by adding new muscle mass to your frame. So 3 workouts per week, I would say, would be the gold standard. I would typically go for a full body approach because it's much easier to distribute that across 3 workouts where you're training a variety of different muscle groups in every single session instead of dedicating one session to one muscle group, i.e. a chest day, back day, leg day. Or what you can do is you can go for a push-pull full body. And what that will allow you to do is to train workouts back to back. A lot of my clients need to do this. They have to work out, let's say, Thursday, Friday or Friday, Saturday. And therefore, sometimes that full body approach can be a little bit more challenging because they're carrying that fatigue from one workout to the next. Now, if you can afford to do more than that, happy days. Let's say you can afford to train 4 times per week, then maybe you might look at something like an upper-lower split. Either way, you've got to look at it as something that you can do on a consistent basis. There's no point committing to 5 workouts per week if on average you're only getting 3, because that will completely change and dictate the type of workouts or the type of setup that you should have. For example, if you go 5 times per week and you're doing something like a push-pull legs upper-lower, but then you always end up missing out on your leg days, then that's going to create havoc in terms of your physique and your overall development. And you would be better off sticking to a more consistent 3-day full body approach. So we had to call for backup, and we have a, once again, almost dying red pen. Anyway, so now it's adjust and progress. Okay, so you have your set calories, you have your nutrition framework in place, you have your step targets and your workout targets. Now, once you start to implement that consistently, you should start to see week on week progress. A downwards trend in body fat, seeing your body weight drop somewhere between 0.5% to 1% per week. Now, when that inevitably starts to plateau, what should you do? What do you need to adjust in order to continue to make progress? So you have a few different options. Number one, the first thing that I look at with clients and myself is, can I be doing something better? So is my nutrition as accurate as what it should be? Am I accounting for everything? And do I need to refine what I'm doing on a nutritional front? That's the first thing I would do. I wouldn't jump to more cardio, immediately jump to cutting calories. I would reflect on what I'm currently doing and making sure that there was nothing slipping under the radar first. Assuming that you're doing everything perfect, next up, I would look at what I want to do. Can I afford to, or do I want to cut back on calories? Or do I have the ability and the time to push output? Now, in my preference, I obviously want to keep my calories at, let's say, 2,000 calories per day. And if I have the time to, I'd rather take my steps from 8,000 up to 10,000. Or maybe now is the time that I would look to add in some cardio into my weekly routine. So I already have my 3 full body workouts in. Now is the time that I'm going to start to add in some cardio. So I might add in 1 half-hour session of steady state cardio per week. And again, accumulatively, that's what's going to move that needle forward. It may not seem like much at first, but it will be enough to bump you again closer towards, like I said, that 0.5% or 1% rate of loss. Or if you want to, you can do a combination of 2 or all of the above. You could make a 100-calorie adjustment, bringing your calories down to 1,900. You can increase your steps from 8,000 to 10,000, and you could add in an extra half-hour cardio. If you have the time availability and it's something you can actually be consistent with, because you can't really afford to cut back on calories, increase steps and increase cardio 1 week, and then to drop it out the week after, because then it will stop you from getting these consistent fat loss results. Once you set these targets, you have to do your best to remain consistent with them in order to see that consistent progress. Hopefully, as always, guys, you found this useful. If you want access to my free 30-day fat loss plan, check out the link below, and within that, it will help you to tick off everything that we've covered today. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.